I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and for political nerds, it was Super Bowl last night. I don't know, Chad, joining me, of course, as always on Wednesdays, is Chad Oban. And Chad, I don't know, I'm feeling pretty good about my statewide prediction that I put in a column. Like, I don't normally like to put specific numbers down, but I did that because a lot of times that'll just end up getting you yelled at. But I felt like I did pretty good. Like, I was feeling almost prescient on some of these statewide races.
Rob, I'm very, very proud of you.
I
think last night's election in North Dakota may have been the least interesting thing that has happened in the whole country.
Oh, give me a break.
It went exactly how we thought it would go.
Yeah.
I think the only thing was numbers.
We had two big curveballs, though, right? Becker jumped in, Munn jumped in, but it just didn't prove to be the thing that everybody thought it was going to be. Let's talk about these races. Let's start in the U.S. Senate race. Rick Becker versus John Hoeven, and I don't know if this is me being unfair, but my headline was Becker bombed. He didn't get 20% of the vote, and I'm looking at the county by county results. He didn't win in a single county. He didn't win his home county in Burleigh County. In fact, I don't know that Hoeven was under 50% in any county except the three where Democrats typically do very well, in Sioux County, which Katrina Christensen won, Rowlett County, which Katrina Christensen won, and Cass County, which Hoeven won, but only with a plurality. He was only at 49%. Becker didn't get a majority anywhere, not out west, not in oil country. He didn't win a single county. He wasn't even particularly close in a single county. That's a bad day for Rick Becker.
Yeah, I agree. But as we've talked about for the last several months, this very much felt like a vanity project for Rick Becker more than anything else. This was a way to stay relevant for a couple months. The fact that Katrina beat him pretty significantly statewide also was interesting. I thought the most interesting things in the Senate race was who's going to take second and how much above 50 does Hoeven get? Does he get 60? So he landed in that between 50 and 60. He won the race handily. Katrina beat Becker. Now what does Becker do? I hope he's quiet for a while. I suspect that's not the case, but I'm sure they're going to find a reason why he didn't break 20%, but
someone cheated, something happened, something else happened. There's some reason why
they cheated him out of 20%. Otherwise he would have just been banging at the door and only losing by 35.
I had a friend send me an email, a mutual friend of ours, send me an email, and it just had 2 lines in it. It said Fintan Dooley, the Democratic NPL Ag Commission candidate, who is literally telling people to vote for Doug Goring, got 56,481 votes statewide. Rick Becker got 44,313. He got beat by Fintan Dooley, who all due respect to Fintan Dooley, when you're literally telling people to vote for the other guy, you're not really campaigning.
Yeah, Fintan Dooley was not a serious candidate, spent no money, didn't really campaign. And
beat Rick Becker by 12,000 votes.
Yeah, and a good solid night for Hoeven again. And a very popular incumbent who ran his plays. I would suggest he didn't need to jump on the Trump train as hard as he did. He still would have got his 50-some-odd% of the vote and won handily. But that's the decision he made. He's going back to the U.S. Senate. So what the hell do I know?
It really interests me as we go up and down these races how much this was a status quo election in North Dakota, except for the fact that we voted for term limits. We voted for all of the incumbents, all the usual people, and then we also voted for term limits. So you go and explain that to me. So
I think the term limits thing is just so interesting. I mean, I was looking at my home district here in 35, where they overwhelmingly voted for term limits while also voting Bob Martinson back into the legislature overwhelmingly. And Bob has been there since 1972. You saw that in District 25, where Larry Lueck was reelected. You saw that in Cynthia Schreiber-Beck. I mean, you see it all over the state where people voted overwhelmingly for term limits, while at the same time reelecting veteran legislators. And at the same time voting for John Hoeven for his third term, voting for Doug Goring for his fourth term. Obviously, those aren't affected by the term limits, but still, if you think we need new blood, it's just very interesting to me that
I wonder if there's going to be some remorse, because my understanding of the term limits measure is whenever it takes effect is when the clock starts ticking. So everybody who's in office now or in office going into this term, I believe, now has 2 terms, right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
So if you're in the state house now, you can get 2 more terms in the state house. Maybe 3. Right. Maybe it starts after that. I don't know. But you can get at least 2 more. Let's put it that way. So it's going to be, but I'm wondering if we're going to reach a point where it starts to kick in, if there's going to be some buyer's remorse from voters, or maybe we'll be so far in the future nobody will remember. I don't know.
I also think, we've been talking about that this was likely to pass overwhelmingly from the beginning. I also think the opposition to it came together so incredibly late. And I also think, having a bunch of legislators as the spokespeople for term limits being bad probably wasn't the best strategy. But I think that's probably a symptom of just throwing together a campaign at the last second.
I think that if they had more time to get their act together, like maybe if we hadn't had a legal squabble over it and the Supreme Court put it back as a surprise, I still don't know if they could have won.
Right.
But I think they could have made it a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and you think about what the sort of establishment political class did to try to defeat this thing, between the legal challenges, between all the different things going on, and then you had all the lobbyists and
to be fair, there wasn't the legal challenge came from the Secretary of State.
I would suggest Al Jaeger's part of the Republican establishment.
I would suggest. You're imputing to him a motivation that he was somehow trying to. He found fraud. I believe he found real fraud. I think that was a real case. Now the state Supreme Court found a legal technicality where somehow he can't keep it off the ballot, despite his office finding fraud, despite the Attorney General's office finding fraud, despite a district court judge finding fraud.
Rob.
Yeah.
Has anybody been charged with fraud? Any crimes?
Not yet. They're still pending.
Yep.
But we'll see.
I think we'll see on that. But I do think that, if they would not have found the potential fraud on the signatures and gone through that whole process, it would have given the opponents more time to run a campaign. So I think that actually hurt the people trying to defeat this thing, that there was that period of time where we thought it wasn't going to get on the ballot.
I don't think it's fair to say that Jagger did what he did as an attempt to defeat it. I think he genuinely perceived problems with the signature collection process. I believe there were problems with the signature collection process.
Rob, I think that is fair.
Yeah.
Your point is fair.
It's in the anyway. That's in the rearview mirror now. All right. Anything else left to say about the Senate race?
No. It is what it is. You could look at the tape from last week and listen to us talking about this Senate race, and it went basically how we thought it would.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the House race, where Kara Mund did. There's two ways to look at it. On one hand, she did about 10% better than the Democratic statewide candidates, who they all came in just short of roughly about 30%, 28, 29%, little bit of variance there. And then Mund was up around 37%, but still well behind Kelly Armstrong, who came in over 60%, 62.2%. Armstrong won every single county in the state except for 3. Mund won where Democrats typically do pretty well in Rowlett County, Sioux County, Cass County. I'm saying that I realize Mund ran as a Democrat, but the results, at least county by county, sure looked like a Democratic candidate.
Yeah, I think that the fact that she won the state's biggest county is interesting. The fact that she ran 10 points ahead. I mean, I think that looking at county by county numbers, I think that she did well in Cass County. I think she slightly overperformed in Burleigh County.
She edged out Armstrong in Cass. She was at
by 1,200 votes. Yeah,
50.95% versus 48.77%. Yeah.
But the reality is, I mean, she didn't do well in Grand Forks, and Democrats or non-Republican incumbents need to do well there. And also, I mean, the fact is Kara and all the Democrats, and again, I'm just talking in terms of people running against Republican incumbents, we're literally getting like low 20s in the teens in places like Williston and Dickinson and those kind of places. As long as Republican incumbents are getting 80% in Williams County and Stark County and other places, there's not enough votes to make up that if you're running against Republicans. I mean, you look at that map, and it's a tough map moving forward for non-Republicans.
Well, the other side of that coin too is if a Republican is doing in Cass County, which is our most populous county, although I always like to remind our friends from Cass County that most people in North Dakota don't live in Cass County. So it's not as goes Cass County, as goes the state. But if you have a Republican who's over 40% in Cass County, they're probably going to have a pretty good night.
And I also think like looking at Stutzman County, which used to be seen as a bellwether.
Not as much anymore, but yeah.
Oh my God, Dems I think at 25% there.
Yeah.
Across the board. And so I think that Dems and progressives need to be looking at a Cass County strategy. If you're not winning really big there and winning the legislative races there, there's no path anywhere else. But Rob, I do want your take on, I mean, there was conversations about 2-hour waits in Cass County last night. I mean, that's unacceptable to me.
Yeah. I'm of two minds about that. I mean, first of all, I'm not at all. In fact, I had a little bit of a back and forth with Zach Racknerud, who was the U.S. House candidate for the Democrats last cycle. And I mean, my initial reaction was you had weeks to vote. You had literally weeks to vote. You know, absentee vote. You didn't even need to go anywhere. You could have had a ballot mailed to you weeks ago with a little bit of foresight. I mean, to me, it's some of it is if you try to finish your Christmas shopping on Christmas Eve, you're going to wait in line. If you wait to the waning hours of the election cycle to vote, you're going to wait in line. It sucks. Now, on the other hand, I'm not against saying, hey, could we open some more polling places or some things we can do to ease it? I'm not saying I'm against that stuff. I'm a little tired of treating every wait line like it's the end of democracy or something.
So, Rob, what I would say to that is we saw a election yesterday in North Dakota that saw 100,000 less people vote than we saw in 2018. 100,000 less people.
Okay,
and
but
still we had waiting lines of 2 hours.
I
would encourage Secretary of State Howe to take a look at this to make sure it never happens again. I think it's unacceptable.
Although, is that decision up to the Secretary of State or is that up to the county? I think it's up to the county.
It's up to the county, but I think he should look into it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, I'm not against that, but just remember, if you're comparing it to 2018, you got to remember we had one of the hottest U.S. Senate races in the country on the ballot in 2018. You go back to like 2014, which was the midterm before that, and the numbers are a lot more comparable. You know, you had 255,000, 2010, you had 240,000.
But that's not my point, Rob. My point is that these counties and these voting locations should have had the capacity to be prepared so people don't have to wait for 2 hours.
I think on the other hand, voters, you know, I don't know how much more we can do when we have weeks and weeks of early voting. Avail yourself of it. If you don't want to wait in line on election day, vote early.
But Rob, historically, you haven't had to wait 2 hours. So
I don't think that's true. I'm pretty sure.
2 hours. I've been working in politics for my whole adult life. I've never heard of people waiting 2 hours in North Dakota to vote.
I have.
Really?
In fact, I think I could look back and find in North Dakota where we've had waits of up to an hour at polling places. I had to wait an hour. Was it 2 or 3 cycles ago here in Minot? I had to wait an hour one time because I waited to the last minute on election day.
I said 2 hours. 2 hours and 1 hour. It's literally twice as long.
Okay. Well, I think this is something that
we can do better.
We can. That's fair. That's fair. And again, I don't want to get hung up on it because I don't disagree with you on the point. I think sometimes I think you guys like to make a big deal out of this sometimes when like you're acting like they're out there suppressing the vote. Like, no. I'm tired of it.
That's actually not my point at all. Okay. And I don't think it would have affected any outcomes. I just think that as a society, we need to make it as easy as possible. And I agree. We've got 30 days or 40 days leading up that you can. We have
been. I mean, that's kind of my point. Yeah. We have been making it very easy. Like you didn't have. Nobody had to wait in line if they didn't want to. With a little bit of foresight, they could have voted at a different time and gotten through easier.
But that's assuming. I mean, maybe in 2 years people now realize that might happen. But if that historically hasn't been the case, and I haven't been aware of it, I don't think we can blame the voters in this case. We can do better, Rob.
All right, fair enough. Anything else to say about Kara Mund? I think her strategy, was to try to catch lightning in the bottle with the abortion issue. It just didn't work. I'm wondering what she's going to do now. It'll be interesting if she takes a job out of state. I think we're probably not going to see her on the ballot again here anytime soon. If she takes a job in the state, that she'll run again. I think the problem she's going to have is you only get to kind of run as that blank slate candidate once. She's this election defined her in some ways, and unless there's a big shift in political winds, boy, I don't know. I
think that it would have been it's an interesting enough race, but it would have been a lot more interesting if she had raised significant dollars and got in a little bit earlier where, she could have helped define Kelly. I mean, I think that Kelly got up on TV and really did a nice job. I mean, I thought the ad with his wife was really good. And so I think that, it wasn't competitive if you don't have the resources to get your message out and define why to fire somebody.
But I don't know. I mean, I think part of the problem was her message too. I'm just not sure I'm not sure that she was articulating a message that was all that palatable to North Dakota. I mean, you get out west on this map, and she's at 22% in McKenzie County. She's at 27% in Williams County. That's pretty tough, and a lot of that probably has to do with the stuff she's saying about the Paris Treaty. And a lot of the stuff, she was hitting Kelly Armstrong on the infrastructure bill. I don't know. People in Williams County, for the most part, probably liked the way he voted on that. So I don't know. If you make that message
they still
louder,
voted for John. They still voted for John Hoeven at 60%.
I realize that this nuance doesn't play through the campaigns very well, but those were two very different votes under very different circumstances in the House and the Senate. You can say because that fits your political narrative, but those were two different votes in different circumstances.
Stop accusing me of having a political narrative.
I have one. I have one too.
Listen, I'm just over here calling balls and strikes, and you're just. But no, I do think it's going to be interesting what Kara does next. I would have liked to see, again, if she had the resources to really go after some of those votes that she talked about in the debates, the insulin, the, capping prescription costs, and if that would have moved the needle at all.
I just don't think it would have. I don't know that you take the campaign if you took the campaign that she run, you put some money behind it and you make it louder. I don't know that it changes much.
Okay, well, I would suggest that if she had money and she was able to do some there was no turnout on the left in this election. And so could people on the left have pushed out turnout more in Cass County? Maybe.
Maybe.
And I think that affected some legislative races.
Maybe, but then but then you run the problem where, I mean, she doesn't want to be pigeonholed as a Democrat, but we're talking about her trying to pull more support from Democrats, and all of her high profile support was from Democrats. I mean, that's
speaking about a guy with talking points. My God, are you going to ever let that one go?
Well, it's reality. It's how the public perceives her.
I wonder why the public perceives her that way.
Probably because she's on Joel Heitkamp's campaigning for her.
Let's get off of Congress. We've talked about this enough.
Okay, I realize that's uncomfortable for you, but she was. I mean,
it's not uncomfortable for me. We've had this conversation 87 times.
I know, but
the Republican ag commissioner nominee supported her. There was people at the Carla Rose Hansen who were delegates to the Republican convention. I mean,
Dina Butcher, who's literally said on the radio that she's left the Republican Party. That's Kara Munn's Republican support. She's a Democrat who tried to run as an independent to hide so she wouldn't have to affiliate with the Democratic Party. That's the reality. And I'm not obliged to buy into any talking points or any spin to suggest otherwise.
No, nobody's given any talking points. You're the one that's just obsessed with the same thing over and over.
Obsessed. It's always an obsession when we're talking about something you don't want to talk about. Or I shouldn't say you. With Democrats, I always hear that. Oh, you're obsessed with this. Let's stop talking about it. Well, yeah, because you don't want to talk about it. That's tough.
Here's the deal. Kara Munn ran 10 points ahead of any Democrat. She probably did better than anybody not named Heidi Heitkamp running as Republican incumbent in decades. That might be a little bit of a stretch, but for quite a long time. If she decides to stick around, I think she's going to have an interesting future.
And I think she's going to have a hard time repeating this number in the future if she runs again. We'll see, though. We'll see. Let's see. Let's move on. Ballot measures, term limits. We talked about a little bit. That obviously won. No big surprise. I thought it might get a little closer than that. I never thought it would lose. I did think it would get a little closer, I guess, but 63-36 is where it ended up. Won in a landslide, and I think all the things that we're talking about, where, again, you drill down, you look at District 35, where voters voted for term limits and then voted for a guy who's been there for 4 decades. I don't know what to say about that. That is schizophrenic.
And not to mention, you look at, the people who were elected. There are so many new people elected this time. I mean, again, going to District 35, that's a Senate seat that nobody has held for, more tthan 2 terms in my lifetime. Yeah. Probably not my lifetime, but a long, long time. We have term limits. We have lots of turnover in our legislature. We didn't need a measure to tell us to do that.
I don't know. I mean, if the people of 35 they obviously like Bob Martinson.
Yeah.
And I'm not.
Who doesn't like Bob?
Well,
Martinson?
I like Bob Martinson. I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Bob Martinson. I'm just saying he must be doing something right because the voters keep voting for him while turning over other seats in his district with some regularity. I just don't see the problem. Marijuana. I came out. I nailed this one almost perfectly, and when I wrote that, I had a lot of people saying no. I had a lot of people telling me I think all your numbers are right, but I think that one's actually going to be the other way. That's what everyone was telling me, but it lost. And my theory about that is I actually think the medical marijuana legalization is working against them, and some of the stuff that the legislature's done to lower, certain marijuana penalties down to like an infraction. I think that's kind of worked against legalization because they've blunted the edge of the prohibition enough where I think there's a lot of North Dakota voters out there who are just saying, we've done enough.
Yeah, I think that I can't tell you what the message was for the proponents of recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
I think that there was lots of good messaging against it. I mean, I did hear one radio ad where they're talking about the proponents of veterans coming back and needing this for medical reasons. Well, we've already got it for medical reasons, right? I mean, I just feel like the campaign lacked a message of why and wasn't particularly well run. I think they did a great job of getting it on the ballot, but then it was sort of like, now what? But there was no compelling reason.
I think when the opposition came out, I think they got caught with their pants down a little bit. I think they were expecting they came out, and I'm sorry, when you get a bunch of cops talking against it, North Dakotans listen to that.
Yeah. Well, and I also think it's interesting the doctors come out, the same doctors who are supporting, vaccinations and masks and whatever, who everybody hated, but on this one they seem to agree with them.
Yeah, so I do think legalization in North Dakota is inevitable. I think just if you look at the national, I think we're just going to end up being behind the national curve a little bit.
Don't you think it seems like around the country this didn't have a good night? I think David Owen said that in one of the articles I read. Do you think we're going to see sort of a pause now with states adding recreational? It doesn't seem like there's going to be a federal push anytime soon. It just feels like we might just need to take a breath.
I don't know.
And see how this plays out.
That's a good question. I do think, I think on a long timeline it's inevitable. But, look, Minnesota hasn't legalized it yet. They accidentally legalized edibles. But Minnesota hasn't legalized it. And Minnesota's to the left of us, culturally. That's probably the wrong way to put it. But you know what I mean. If Minnesota hasn't done it, North Dakota is usually going to be behind Minnesota on some of this stuff. So I think we'll get there. I think a lot of it's a generational thing too. I think as the demographics of the electorate change a little bit, you're going to see some more support for this.
You also saw a huge east-west divide there on recreational marijuana. It passed overwhelmingly in Cass. It passed by a small margin in Grand Forks and just got demolished like in Burleigh County in places out here. So I think there is a bit of an east-west sort of divide on marijuana.
But even in Burleigh County, you had 42% yes. I'm looking at Ward County, 43% yes. Williams County, 43% yes. McKenzie County, 42.9.
And what did it get in Cass? It got like 65, I think.
Cass
60 maybe?
No, Cass was 56.8.
Okay.
It's 56.8, and then 51 yes in, I'm looking at the right, Measure 2. 51% in Grand Forks. The four counties where it won was Rowlett County at 57%. Sioux County at 66.5, Grand Forks at 51.21, Cass at 56.8. Those of you listening, we're talking about Rowlett, Sioux. That's the Turtle Mountain Reservation, and the Standing Rock Reservation is Sioux County, and then obviously Cass and Grand Forks are the two big university towns. Those are usually, to the extent that North Dakota has any Democratic or liberal strongholds, those are them. The other one is kind of, sometimes that can kind of surprise you, is like Montreal County out west here. Although even there it was 52.8% no, but Montreal has a lot of the 3 affiliated tribes, Fort Berthold Reservation in it. So those are areas that are kind of, if you're looking for parts of the state that are going to go kind of bluish on an issue or a candidate, those are kind of the places to watch. That's why we've been talking about them. But I guess, it was disappointing to me. I do think we need to legalize for all the arguments we've been talking about ad nauseum forever. But, I guess North Dakota's just not ready for it.
Yep.
Let's see. Legislative races. Tough night. Now, you and I were debating a little bit. Redistricting made the math a little complicated. I came up with, and again, these results, all of these results are unofficial. None of this is set. And there's a couple of, there's a couple of possible recounts in District 25, where Cindy Beck, Republican, and Elisa Mitzkog, Democrat, they won by the unofficial results, but there's a potential recount there. District 43, which was one of the losses for the Democrats, Mary Adams currently in third place there behind Zach Ista, who's in the House race, who's a Democrat, and Eric Murphy, who's a Republican. But I had it as Democrats losing 4 seats in the Senate. Right? Did I have that right? Hold on. I got to pull everything.
No, it's 3 seats in the Senate because it was 40-7.
That's right. No, 3 seats in the Senate. I had them losing 3 seats in the House and 3 seats in the Senate and 4 in the House. That's where I had them. But I think you had one less Democratic loss in the House.
Yeah, because I think if you look at District 10 in Fargo, where the Dems did pick up a Senate seat, they also picked up a House seat there, but that's a brand new district. And so I'm thinking about it as it's a brand new district that likely replaced 3 Republicans somewhere in the state. But, I think the legislative races went sort of how I expected. You and I were talking. The only one that I was a little surprised by is I thought Janelle Bakke in 43 would hold on, but she's actually been dealing with some family health members, so was out of town the last week or two of the election with a very sick sibling. So that one surprised me. Richard Marcellet up in District 9, an incumbent Democrat who lost on the Fort Berthold reservation, didn't surprise me as much because that district really got interesting and expanded. And there were some issues with the tribal election was last Tuesday. The general election was this Tuesday. So probably some confusion on people having to go out and vote twice. I think that probably hurt Marcellet, who's a tribal member up there.
Yeah, because that District 9 again has the Turtle Mountain Reservation, and then Senator Marcellet, for people who don't know, one of the first Native Americans to serve in the state legislature. So obviously that Native American turnout is very impactful for him, and clearly with the tribe not holding their election on the same day as the state election. I guess that explains that. Although in what was it, 9A, one of the sub-districts, I can't remember if it's 9A or 9B, longtime Representative Marvin Nelson lost, which was a little bit surprising to me, but maybe not after redistricting, because when they redid those sub-districts, I guess he was the one, he got the non-tribal area, which in that part of the state's going to be, once you get off the reservation land, is going to be pretty red.
Yeah, I think that seat was interesting because it is pretty. I mean, it's a rural white area of the state. We know how that goes generally for Democrats. But the woman who won is, going to be a Bastiat sort of member. She beat Chuck Damshin in the primary and then beat Marvin Nelson in this. So I think
Donahan, I think potentially has a potential to be one of the most. I mean, with Rick Becker not in the legislature anymore, there's going to be a little bit of a leadership vacuum for the Bastiats, and she's someone who could potentially be that for them.
Yeah, I think the House is interesting with Becker not being there, and Terry Jones lost, who's also part of that sort of. That
was another sub-district, and he was on the one on the reser. Is it 4A? I think it's 4A. But he was.
I can never keep track.
Yeah, but it's 4 because there's two districts got subdivided, 4 and 9, and they did that specifically to try to avoid a redistricting mess. And I don't know, some of the tribes, that whole thing's going to be a mess because some of the tribes are suing, but other tribes liked it. Like I know Representative Ruth Buffalo, who by the way lost last night, but she's a member of the 3 affiliated tribes. She stood up on the floor and praised the redistricting plan. I know Chairman Mark Fox from the 3 affiliated tribes, he praised the plan, but it's also getting sued, so that's a mess.
But I think the House does change without Terry Jones, without Becker, without Ertelt, without Skro down in District 25, who you referenced.
Is it Skro or Skra?
Skra.
I think it's Skra. I always say it's Skra.
I'll stick with Skra.
I've spoken to her and pronounced it Skra, and she didn't correct me, so I'm assuming that's what it is.
And Luke Simon's obviously not there. I think that there is sort of a change in some of those sort of more bombastic. Jeff Magrum walked across the hall, so he's no longer in the House.
He's the Senate's problem now.
Yes, he's the Senate's problem. So I think there might be a little more balance between the far right radical folks between the House and the Senate moving forward.
It's interesting because we're going to go from these legislative races, and again, I mean, depending on the number of Democrats. Whether Chad or I are right in our count, and I maybe need to go through them again. Just to be clear, I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning last night. I was doing this after midnight, so I could be off by a seat. But I ran it by some other reporters, and we all kind of reached a consensus. So I don't know.
But Rob, I think the difference is just how I think we agree on the number of Democrats that will be there, right? It's just how do you sort of right? Because aren't you at 84-10?
In the House, 83-11 is where I'm at.
Okay. So we should stop talking about this, but because I used to think we had one more Democrat, And now, anyway, we should stop talking about that.
Chad and I might be wrong. Regardless, Democrats.
It's a supermajority for Republicans.
Democrats lost ground, and in the Senate, I'm sure about the Senate number. The Democrats are down to 4. Yeah. They can hold their caucus meetings in a diner booth.
Yeah, but I also think what's interesting here is, so, you mentioned Ruth Buffalo losing. That district got really difficult for her through redistricting. Again, I'm not criticizing redistricting. It's just that's the reality. But 2 Native American women, Jamie Davis and Lisa DeVille, in District 4 got elected, and Hamida DeCain got elected in District 10, who's an African American. So there is going to be some more diversity in that very small caucus. And I think there's only 3 male Democrats in the House, which is also interesting.
I'd have to look. I think that's interesting. I think I was wondering if we were going to hear some complaining about the redistricting. I would challenge in a state where the Republican majority, I'm sorry, it's growing. It's growing, and I don't know how you draw the lines without hurting. I mean, I don't think Democrats are being hurt by drawing lines so much as just this is a state that is still, even with the Republican supermajorities it has, is still trending Republican.
Yeah, and one of the new districts that was drawn was District 10 in Cass County,
right,
which elected 2 out of 3 Democrats.
Right.
So it's hard to complain about that.
Yeah, so that tide will turn one day. I just don't know when. And honestly, if I have been in some rooms with some Republicans who have said we would be a better governing majority if we lost some races. Not because they're enthusiastic about putting Democrats in office, but because they're not very. They're feeling that some of their fellow Republicans are feeling so bulletproof. It's like there's no consequences for anything.
But yet they continue to pour money into these young Republican candidates in District 43 and District 11.
Well, you'll notice Ethan.
They both lost.
Carter Isinger in District 11, Ethan Herschel in District 43, who were 2 members. If you followed my story about the North Dakota Young Republicans and their Telegram group, right? Is it Telegram or Telegraph? God, I'm old. Whatever it is.
I have no idea.
I'm forgetting now. But anyway, it's this online chat group, and they were racial slurs and ugly stuff. Those were 2 of the participants in that group, and they both lost. Hartzell took 4th. I guess I didn't look at Isinger, but I'm sure he lost.
I think he might have taken 3rd there, but the Democrats won handily in that district.
Let's talk national.
Wow.
Bad night for Trump.
Bad night for Trump. Bad night for Republicans.
Yes.
Good night for Joe Biden.
I say that. I mean, we're saying bad night for Republicans. They still may take the House.
Yeah, they still may. Hell, they still may take the Senate, even though I think it ends up 51-49 Democrats.
I think that's my guess too.
But this is an expectations game. And when you go in and, last week we talked about, Republicans are going to take the House. It's just a matter of, is it, 15 or 35 or whatever. And then Kornacki's on MSNBC last night saying our suggestion is 219 to 216. That's crazy how this ended up. And I think one of the interesting things is seeing the split between governors and Senate races in places like Arizona and Georgia and other places where the Senate. Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, let's talk about some of that. Let me run down the list because there's kind of a bunch of races. Pennsylvania, obviously, you had Doug Mastriano, who was a hard right MAGA, election conspiracy guy.
Thank you, Donald Trump, for that one.
Yeah, Donald Trump. Yeah, Donald Trump basically put him in the race, and he lost by 13 points. But there was a split. Dr. Oz lost against Fetterman by, I think, just 3 points. And even that one, like Oz was not. I mean, Trump rallied for Oz. Oz was a Trump guy. There's no question, but didn't go down the election conspiracy hole the same way Mastriano didn't embrace Trump the same way Mastriano did, therefore performed better, but still I think had enough Trump stink on him where he couldn't beat Fetterman, who I'm sorry is not, and I say this with all due respect for Mr. Fetterman and all the hope in the world that he regains his full health, but I don't think is fit to sit in the United States Senate right now. I don't think he can give the people of Pennsylvania 100%. I wish Democrats had replaced him on the ballot when they had a chance, when they had other perfectly good options who didn't have health challenges in front of them, and yet Dr. Oz still loses to him. I think a better candidate without the Trump stink on him could probably beat Fetterman in that race.
Well, and I'd also suggest that if Mastriano wasn't such a terrible candidate, where Shapiro's winning by 13, Josh Shapiro went from the attorney general in Pennsylvania to a potential future president in 24 hours. He's really got a lot of shine on him right now. But the other thing that's important about the governor's race in Pennsylvania, he gets to appoint the Secretary of State. That's not an elected office there. And when we talk about how important Secretary of States are moving forward, that's a big deal for Shapiro.
In Georgia, meanwhile, Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock, that's heading for a runoff. So we're not going to know that one for a while, obviously for months.
I think what's interesting about that one is how much money is Mitch McConnell going to put into that seat if Dems already have the majority, if they've already got 50 seats? I mean, don't you think, Rob, if you're Mitch McConnell, wouldn't you rather have the Dems have 51 seats and not have to deal with Herschel Walker?
I think so, because he's going to be a Lauren Boebert in the Senate. Which, by the way, Lauren Boebert is possibly going to lose in a what is typically a pretty solid Republican district in Colorado. The last I checked, she was trailing. But Georgia's really interesting because you have Herschel Walker, who underperformed Brian Kemp, who ran for governor, significantly. Now, Brian Kemp taking on Stacey Abrams, who is a very much a national figure, lots and lots of money behind her. Democrats very, very enthusiastic. I think in a lot of ways perceived as a star for the Democrats, and we can argue about whether or not she should have been. But he thumped her pretty good. He won. Yep. And hugely. So you have Kemp and Walker on the same ballot, and Kemp, who stood up to Donald Trump. Right? Remember all the stuff with Trump in Georgia and election conspiracy? Kemp stood up to Trump, stood against Trump, and seriously outperformed Herschel Walker, who was the Trump candidate in the Senate race. That is a message for Republicans. Are you listening?
Well, and I think the other message that I heard is, hey, Democrats, we don't have to invest millions and millions of dollars into Stacey Abrams and Beto O'Rourke anymore. Those weren't winnable seats. And also, Florida's done. Democrats should go ahead and cut ties with Florida. I mean,
Ron DeSantis. I mean, while Trump rightfully taking the blame for Mastriano, Oz, Walker. We could talk about the gubernatorial candidate in Arizona, Kari Lake, who's losing at this point against the Katie Hobbs, who's not terribly well liked in Arizona, but it's just Kari Lake is so flippin' crazy. I feel like the voters are kind of holding their nose and voting for Hobbs. This is my perception from afar.
Yeah, I can see Lake still winning that one, though.
You think so?
As more numbers come in. I also, Katie Hobbs was the Secretary of State in Arizona who was involved in all the election stuff last time. She refused to debate Lake, which I hate.
Yeah.
I think that's I think Mark Kelly holds on there, and I think the governor's race ends up really
That's
close.
Kelly versus the Blake Masters, who is another very, very Trumpy candidate.
Yep.
Let's see, and what else did I have?
Wisconsin is another one that I think is interesting, where Tony Evers is the incumbent Democrat who won. I think he got close to 52. And Ron Johnson, it looks like, is going to survive a challenge by Mandela Barnes in a very, very close race. So again, the difference between Evers, the Democrat governor, and Mandela Barnes, the Democrat Senate challenger, is 2 or 3 or 4 points. But that's the difference between winning and losing in a state like Wisconsin.
The other one is Michigan, Grand Rapids area. You had we talked about it, where it was Peter. He was an incumbent representative Republican, Peter Mayer, who lost in the primary to a Trump candidate, John Gibbs, and part of the reason why he lost is because Democrats ran ads against Mayer, accusing him of not being sufficiently. We talked about how cynical and everything else that was, but Democrats basically pushed Mayer out of the race, and I guess it paid off for them because Hillary Scholten won in that, and for the first time in 50 years, that congressional district has elected a Democrat. So again, I mean that district, whatever the Democrats did, that the Republicans in that district chose a Trumpy candidate, a MAGA candidate, over the sort of the incumbent who had voted to impeach Donald Trump, and they paid for it. And now for the first time in 50 years is a Democrat in that congressional seat.
And I think there's a seat in Washington or Oregon that was the same sort of situation. But I think Michigan's interesting. They also have a trifecta there now where the Democrats hold the governor's office in both legislative chambers. And I think it's the state Senate that Michigan Democrats hold for the first time since 1984. And I don't think that was even on people's radar to flip that. Same with Minnesota. Minnesota elected Democrats up and down the ballot and then held on to the House and flipped the Senate. And so I think Minnesota and Virginia were the only two states with split chambers before last night. And now Virginia is the only one left. I mean, if that doesn't tell you something about divided government, that there's only one state where the one party holds the Senate and one different party holds the House.
Florida, I guess, is the other side of that coin, though.
Right.
Ron DeSantis had a hell of a night. And really, I mean, a good night at the right time for him, because obviously now we're at the tippy top of the 2024 cycle now. Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump obviously expecting to be, kind of clash of the titans for the Republican primary. And right now, Trump's looking like a loser, and Ron DeSantis is looking like a winner to Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping one of the things that comes out of this is you'll have the traditional Republicans maybe feel more empowered to stand up to Trump after he had such a terrible night last night. He may be able to win some primaries. He proved that over the last year, but winning generals is a whole nother topic. And now, I mean, what does Biden do? What does Trump do? Now we're into 2024.
Is Biden going to be on the ballot again? I mean,
I think that's the question. I think last night could have ended that speculation. But I think, they're taking a victory lap.
I'd like to see younger people. I'm sorry if that sounds ageist, but Joe Biden's going to be 81 years old on Election Day in 2024. Donald Trump, if he ends up being the nominee, is going to be 78.
Right.
We need somebody more vigorous, and we need people who are frankly better. We deserve better. If it's a choice between Trump and Biden again, I think we all lose.
One other candidate that I think, even though he lost, Tim Ryan in Ohio was competitive in a state that's getting more and more difficult. But I think he sort of provides a bit of a blueprint for Democrats moving forward to talk about. He talked about the economy from the beginning. And maybe he was proven wrong last night, because last week you and I talked about how maybe the Dems overplayed abortion. Well, we might be wrong based on what happened last night, but I think Tim Ryan really is a blueprint of messaging that Democrats can use in these parts of the country.
I don't think abortion was the fact. I don't think it was. I think it still wasn't. I think there's just a lot of other forces at play. I don't think it was abortion.
So I think one of the interesting things, so young people turned out in huge numbers in a lot of these swing states to figure out what the motivator was for young people in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And if abortion was their motivator, then abortion was the issue. That
it wasn't. I don't think it was in North Dakota. I mean,
oh no, I don't. I think you're right there. Yeah, and I used to tell people nationally that North Dakota is a unique place. That the younger you get, the more conservative you get. Democrats historically have done better with older people who are dying off, and then young people are more conservative. So we're unique.
So we can wrap up. We had some speculation about what does Rick Becker do next. I just had a statement from his campaign land in my inbox. And I can read this to you, Chad, and we can kind of reflect on how we feel about this. The statement says, I quote, "When I first entered this race, it was never based on the likelihood of winning or gaining a certain percentage. The tides are shifting in America, and this campaign was about doing what's right for the people of North Dakota and giving voters who felt like they didn't have someone they could stand behind on the ballot an option. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. It's about getting in the arena, working hard, and putting up a fight. That's exactly what our campaign achieved. I want to thank my wife, Ann, and my family for the sacrifices they made to make all of this possible. I want to thank my friends, supporters, and volunteers for getting involved, giving it their all, and letting me be a part of this movement." And here's where it gets interesting, Chad. This is not a loss. If you think about what happened in our state and where we are as a country, our movement is just getting started. There is an election in 2 years, and all of those who have been activated all across North Dakota for the past year are going to stay involved. What do you make of that?
Well, it sounds to me like he might be running for governor in 2 years is one thing that I interpreted. I will say I agree with him. It's hard to run for office. People have to put up, and so people who run for office deserve some level of praise. But that last paragraph is all again about him getting attention and people having conversations like you and I are about to have about, ooh, what's Rick Becker going to do next? But he definitely wants people to think he's running for governor, would be my guess.
I just don't. I think the one thing is I think Rick Becker would love to run for governor. I think the man loves the spotlight. As to your point, he likes people like you and I talking about him. I think the problem he's going to have is how willing are a lot of his supporters to buy into the dream again. Because running for office is expensive. I fully expect Doug Burgum, despite his claims to support term limits, I fully expect him to run for governor again this coming cycle. And beating Doug Burgum is going to be an expensive proposition. And maybe Becker doesn't care if he wins. I mean, maybe that's the mistake I'm making. But maybe he's just running so that he'll be interviewed and can be on debates and yell at people and get lots of attention that way. But I don't know. I mean, I'm wondering, whatever Rick Becker may or may not want to do, I feel like this election this year pierced a lot of the mystique around him that was built on some pretty good performances and conventions. But this is the first time he's ever appeared on a statewide ballot, and he bombed. And I'm trying to think of another Republican on the statewide ballot who he would do better against, and I'm struggling.
Well, and this idea that it's not about winning and losing, I think you can make that case sometimes. I mean, I think there's people who get in the race who are like, I want 6 months, I want to talk about issues that are important to me. I don't know that that's necessarily the case with Becker. I mean, he does talk about issues that are important to him, but I think part of it is just the ego side of things, that he just wants people talking about him, not necessarily about the movement.
You were in the room sitting next to me at the NDGOP state convention, and you heard his thing, and he said that this was about saving America, right? I mean, that was his words. It's do or die. This is about save America. To me, you can't go from that to winning isn't everything, right? Because you didn't win, Rick, so I guess America's not saved.
And of all the elected officials that are potentially going to harm America, John Hoeven is not even close to on the list of people we need to be concerned about who are that America needs saving from. I mean, come on. So
I've been telling people I want boring. I mean, John Hoeven's kind of like, I want boring. I want boring debates about infrastructure. I want boring debates about welfare and entitlement and all the other things. That's what I want again. I want to get back to that. I don't want to be entertained by the politicians anymore.
Looks like Rob Port wants to be unemployed by the sounds of things.
Oh, hush. I believe me, Rob Port will always be fine. I work in a recession-proof industry.
So, Rob, why are you so confident that Burgum runs again? I mean, I haven't heard either way.
Conversations that I've had with people. I don't want to. I have not spoken with Doug Burgum. I don't want to I have not. I'm not. And also I don't want to leave the I've talked to the governor and he told me his plans. That's not the case. I have not been told anything by anybody who works for Doug Burgum. But I know people who are certainly in a position to know, and they fully expect him to run.
But at some point, isn't the Good Old Boys network that he fought against now his Good Old Boys? I mean, right?
Well, I think you're overestimating his level of
commitment to that.
Well, first of all, his level of commitment to his campaign rhetoric, which I have always told Doug Burgum when we've had conversations, I have told him that the actual Doug Burgum is a lot more interesting than this sort of caricature that he plays on the campaign trail.
Agree 100%.
And honestly, I think that's true of like somebody like Karamund too. I think the actual Karamund is a lot more interesting than what she just tried to do on the campaign trail. That's a different discussion. But I think, I think he says term limits because he knows term limits are popular. I think he's going to run for a third term and clearly doesn't really believe in term limits. I guess we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I just don't think I am.
So, Rob, isn't that what makes people cynical about politics?
Yes.
Is that you say something, the last week or so of the campaign, there's been some hits on both sides that have absolutely driven me crazy in the District 35 Senate race. The Dems wrote a letter criticizing Sean Cleary for being married to a lobbyist. You realize the previous senator was married to a lobbyist.
That was
Democrat.
you. That was you.
It was me.
Yeah.
It was me. And then Sean Cleary's campaign accused Tracy Potter of being a career politician. Tracy Potter's been in public office for 4 years of his whole life. He may have wanted to be other things, but it's just like both of those hits were just like,
yeah. I mean, he's held some government jobs, but I mean, they weren't elected offices. But yeah, I mean, that's just
I just hate it. I just
yeah.
hate it. And I like both of those candidates.
Well,
very much.
There was one too, and I'm forgetting. I think it might have been in the District 11 race, right? That's Dobrovich, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it was in the District 11 race, and it was from some national Trumpy group, and they were accusing Dobrovich of like letting illegal immigrants into the country, and I'm thinking, I don't think Richard Dobrovich has anything to do with border control. Like, the North Dakota legislature really has nothing to do with border control. Like, I don't understand where that's coming from. This is such a stupid, whatever you feel about illegal immigration and that whole quagmire of a policy area, it really has no relevance for a legislative campaign in North Dakota.
It's sort of like talking about abortion in a treasurer's race. Right?
Right. Yes, exactly. Like, I'm pro-life, right? When we're talking about Dan Johnston, when Mike Lindell and Donald Trump inexplicably endorsed in North Dakota's treasurer race and talked about what a good social conservative Dan Johnston is. He's going to make sure that all the dollars in the treasury are pro-life dollars and none of these pro-abortion dollars that you hear so much about.
Tom Beadle might have started the trend of beating Donald Trump endorsed candidates in this country. He deserves a lot of credit.
So that was the other thing is I think for as much as North Dakota has a reputation for being a very pro-Trump place, and in many ways we've earned that reputation, and Kevin Cramer in a lot of ways is a Trump sycophant. But if you look, our delegation voted to certify the election. And if you look, the Republican establishment or the traditional Republicans or whatever you want to call them, they're holding the line against the MAGA people. It is not, North Dakota is not turning into Arizona as one example, or some of these other places. They're holding the line.
And the Republican candidate, now elect for Secretary of State, Michael Howe, said he trusted the election results. And,
right.
And he wasn't one of these election deniers.
He's not. He's not. I'm not. You probably didn't vote for him, but I think you would probably say you have confidence that Michael Howe's going to do that job with integrity. Absolutely. There's no doubt. So anyway, I think that's a very interesting note that North Dakota, I don't want to, is ahead of the curve but I mean, as some other parts of the country have gone very, very Trump, North Dakota, at least in some ways, hasn't. Yeah. In some ways. If you look past the sort of nominal, like Doug Burgum supports Donald Trump, is that a reflection of how Doug Burgum feels in his heart? I don't think so. But, John Hoeven, right? Like waving the Trump endorsement in the air. Good politics. Do you think John Hoeven really likes Donald Trump and his style of politics? Again, I mean, I've been feeling really cynical about politics, and now this conversation's making me feel even more cynical. I know. The reality is our congressional delegation also participated in a Stop the Steal rally. That's fair. A while ago. Absolutely fair. They've gotten better. They got to a good place, but they weren't perfect. They flirted with it. No, that's fair. The point I'm making is maybe it's not a point worth making, but I guess I'm saying it could be worse from my perspective. My God, your bar is getting so low, Rob. Tell me about it. I know. It's so low you could trip over it. Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for our election postmortem. I think our conclusions are Trump's a loser.
My son would tell me we shouldn't call people names.
Well, all due respect to Evan, it's not name calling if it's accurate.
I'm going to leave that one alone. Not going to touch it.
You're not going to touch it? I went there. All right, well, that's it. Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. We'll be back with more fun election analysis and political stuff. We're not going to have a hell of a lot to talk about. We'll find some things to talk about next week. Thanks for tuning in. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.